I had another question someone wrote in. How do you reconcile the power differential when you are the supervisor and you identify as white, and the team, it looked like exclusively identifies women of color? Now, I don't know what racialized, marginalized identities, but all women of color. And so the power differential against needing to lead, train, conduct performance improvement. So when I was thinking about this one, I was hoping that this person, or we whites, intentionally do a lot of group and team development. And so everything from, so again, go to my radio show, Transformation and Change Radio. On there, I think my August radio show was around creating high-performing inclusive teams. And so you get a lot of conversation about that. I have a webinar on that, an old one. If you email me, I'll send it. And I have a new one February 11th. So it'll be similar material with my new ideas. So really thinking about how do you create an inclusive team? Having people be able to talk about their passion for their work, what's their roles and responsibilities, what's their mission, how they see them really perpetuating the mission, so they're really building. You're talking and they're talking. Some good foundational engagement, agreement, negotiation, co-creating. And in that conversation to say things like, so as supervisor, I'm going to work within these same engagement agreements, whether we're in meetings, one-on-one, we're in trainings together. You're giving me feedback, I'm giving you feedback, coaching. So how would you like us to engage? As a group, you can talk about how people like to give and receive feedback, give and receive coaching, and clearly one-on-one to have those conversations. Now within that, to be acknowledging, so we have different group identities, which may impact how you take me in, how I take you in, hopefully not, but maybe how we engage each other. And so let me tell you, so the close I can get to this one is when I'm co-facilitating, and it's my project, and I have women of color and men of color. I don't think I've ever coed with trans of color, to my knowledge. Yes, I have. So across all identities. So I'll often say, so I have so many privileged identities. In this case, I am the lead consultant. It's my client. Appreciate you working with me. And I want to develop as much a collegial relationship given our different privileged, marginalized identities. And so can we just kind of talk through what are salient, the most kind of up identities that we see in each other, but also what the participants will see, and then how that might influence our relationship and what we need to be thinking about before and during. And so I might talk about, you know, as you've identified as a person of color and I'm white, I know I'm working very consciously to notice if I am coming out of, you know, white supremacy attitudes of I know best or controlling. And I'm balancing that with I'm also holding the entire workshop and the entire client over time. And so can we, you know, talk about what it means for you to be a person of color working with me as a white person who is the person in charge, and what needs you have and how you want me to be. So those sorts of things. You can tell I'm extroverting and it's not as crisp as I might be if I think about it and write it down. But to be honest, sometimes extroverting can show up authentic. There are other group memberships that folks have that the team can talk about. For instance, some usually are here longer. And so what are we going to, how can we have an inclusive conversation and decision-making around years of experience? You might have some folks, you said they're all women of color. So you might have some folks who have a disability and some folks that are not disabled. You might have some people who have 20 years experience but are new to the organization. So how can they bring their wisdom from other places? So you're looking at the full breadth of differences. My group identity card activity can be a powerful strategy where people can look at, I think I have 35 now, different group identities where there's privileged and marginalized identities. So having people doing a good foundational diversity workshop together, building relationships, finding their voice, but also recognizing that we all have privileged identities, we all have marginalized. It's very rare that even for a woman of color, they won't find a privileged identity. They might be cisgender, they might be US born, English might be their first language. They might have some educational background that has more status and influence and power than someone else on the team who might have a high school degree. So for folk of color to be able to talk about what are some of the race dynamics that often happen in organizations that we want to be really aware of, and what other interpersonal aggressions, unproductive dynamics can happen in meetings given our different group memberships, and then how can we resolve them in the moment, particularly if I, as the white supervisor, interrupt someone, if I speak over, if I sound like I had the idea when actually 10 minutes ago one of the women of color said the same thing. So some of the handouts that I use, common unproductive meeting behaviors in general, what can we do when these happen? And when they're coming from someone in a privileged identity to marginalize, particularly me with hierarchy and being white. And then if you have other, maybe you're the most senior person as the white person. So broadening the topic to all identities with keeping race centered and hierarchy centered, because those are the two that for sure you've got privileged identity. A couple other ideas I had, having them talk about not only again their passion, but what's their vision for their work, for their specific work, but what's our vision? That we have different roles and responsibilities, but we're all important. I think those are my notes. Continue to do check-ins. So with the team, I bet every month or so, what's useful about how we're engaging each other in meetings, what else could we be doing one-on-one with folks, what's working between our relationship, is there any feedback you have for me, any behaviors that I'm doing that you want to help hold up a mirror so that my behaviors aligned with my core values. Because you have so many, at least two privileged identities to marginalize, folks may not believe you for a while unless you come back and say, I've gotten some feedback that I've been doing these behaviors and I apologize. Does anyone want to talk about the impact I've been having? Because I commit to changing. And so holding space to hearing impact if there is any, and then say, here's what I'm trying to do differently. You may not have noticed, but this is my intent. And are there other things you want me doing so that I'm not back into some of these unproductive behaviors? So looping back, not saying who shared the feedback, but acknowledging it publicly. You can also have someone come in and lead some of these team building. When I go in to work with a group, if it's a small enough group, I'm doing one, actually a couple coming up, where I'll be doing individual interviews because there's so much current conflict right now. This question was much more about proactively, I think. But if there is some tension and conflict in race and hierarchical dynamics and other dynamics, you'd have someone come in one-on-one or small group conversations, and I'd probably bring in a person of color to hear. They interview you, and then they help facilitate dialogue I often will type up the themes I heard with no names, and I try to make it generic enough. And I don't put everything in because sometimes I'm like, they're going to know who you are. But that's a more intense intervention, but it can help a group that's mildly to mediumly dysfunctional, or at least not highly productive yet, to do some gardening and to kind of spring cleaning, and then renegotiate engagement agreements. How can we, across our different identities by race, hierarchy, and others, name them, really support each other and not add to the oppressive dynamics that might be in the culture and the climate? Other quick strategies might be having everyone do the Myers-Briggs, the strength inventory. All of them have a bias, gender and race, and maybe others. So nothing's perfect, and then you can use them in ways that are more socially aware. If folks know of other good kind of self-awareness, work style assessments, you can put them in the chat or hop on. But those sorts of interventions can help people realize there's multiple dynamics going on in the moment. Race is probably always involved in hierarchy, And it could be introvert, extrovert. It could be that some people are on task and timely and others are more flowing, all kinds of things. And then performance management. Unfortunately, most organizations are very incompetent and ineffective around performance management in general. It's kind of a once a year, top down. And without training for people who are supervisors about how to have a race, white culture lens as you're doing these. So for instance, sounds like all your folks are folk of color. Most folks will have a mixed race group, and the data, whether it's from K-12 classrooms or in organizations, is as a white person, I can do a behavior that's unproductive and I get the benefit of the doubt. Person of color does the same behavior and they're held accountable. They might be given feedback in the moment or shortly after, or white supervisors might kind of build it all up because we don't have the capacity yet to give effective feedback across race. We're scared of being called racist, and we're just not skilled at analyzing, this is the feedback I have. What could be the race cut to this? Does anyone else in the organization do the same behaviors? Have I planned to have the same conversation with them? And so looking to your HR, your organizational training and development folks, your anybody who's a sponsor that does pretty good supervision, to get some skill development and maybe even more workshops on how do you create high performing inclusive teams, feedback and coaching in the moment and over time, every one-on-one, and to be able to say to the people you're supervising, so together, everyone together and also one-on-one, my role and job is to support you in your fullest success. And my intention is to tell you when your behaviors and your strategies and your ideas are really helping us achieve our goals. My hope is you'll let me know what you're doing because I won't be aware of everything. And there might be a time where a comment you made, a behavior, not following up on something, that I need to have a conversation with you because it's getting in your way of high performance. It's impacting the team. In those situations, what's the best way for me to share that kind of feedback, particularly as a white person, supervisor by hierarchy, and someone, a woman of color? How do you like feedback and how can I best do that? So negotiate that ahead of time. And then in the moment to say, I do have some feedback for you. You had said you like feedback this way. I just want to check if that's still up. And so you can ask them because they may have changed in the last 3 months. And then be able to describe the feedback, just the facts. Here's my understanding of the situation. So not this is the right way. Just say, my understanding is we had negotiated a timeline and we renegotiated that a couple times. But the last time I said, this is the actual final time I need the material, and I still didn't get everything from you. And so you're describing, and then can you help me understand? So describe your understanding. So help me understand from your perspective what your experience was and what were the dynamics involved. Rachel Maddow thought just came into my mind. I don't know if you watch MSNBC, her show. I'll bet almost 100% of the time when she is a guest, she'll do a framing, could be 2 to 5 minutes. And her first question is, how I framed it, what else would you add? Is there anything I got wrong? And that is a supervisor's pretty good strategy because it could be, here's my understanding. Am I missing some facts? Did I get parts of that wrong? What other information you have that help me understand the complexity? So that could be a good 1-2 step, kind of a dance step. Here's my understanding and help me, what else? So that's my best thinking around your question when there's a power differential by hierarchy and race.